Today, I want to share a little bit about what I've learned about how you can invite the people outside your world into the thing that matters most to you. Unlike Nat, I'm not a researcher. I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and I run an art museum. Imagine what my parents think about me. I run a museum of art and history in Santa Cruz, California. It's called the Ma, and it looks like this from the outside. If you don't know anything about Santa Cruz, from this picture you can get the reality that we are a town of hippies, also surfers, harder to see from this picture. Today, the Ma is a thriving community gathering place for our town of 65,000 people on the Central Coast, but it did not look like this when I first came to become its executive director 8 years ago. At the time, we had two really big problems. The first was money. We didn't have any. The day I walked in the door as our new director, we had $16,000 in the bank, we had $36,000 in unpaid bills, and there was no magic check on the horizon. The board was talking about closing the doors of the museum. At the same time, though, we had an even bigger problem, and it was a problem of relevance. There were more people in Santa Cruz who knew that this building used to be the county jail than knew that it was now a museum. And it had been a museum at this point for almost 20 years. And it was in the context of this dual crisis that I was hired and that the board and the staff of the museum was spurred to act. Somebody once told me crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and I believe it. We decided we wanted not just to survive, but to find a new path forward for our institution. And so we went about changing the way we worked. We decided we were going to become a museum of our community, empowering and creating a platform for voices of all different backgrounds in our community. We decided that instead of making all the stuff ourselves, we were going to share programs created by our community. And you may guess where this is coming. Yes, we did this so that we could make a space that was welcoming for our whole community. Becoming of, by, and for our community, it wasn't just about inviting people to look in a new way, but to act in a new way in our space. It changed the way people connected with the museum, and it changed the business of what we were able to achieve. Let me show you what that change looked like. When I came to the museum in 2011, we had a budget of $700,000 a year. As I mentioned, we had no cash. We had 7 staff members. We had 17,000 visitors that year, mostly retired white people and school children. Here's what it looks like today. We have a budget of $3 million. We've got 40 staff. We have 148,000 visitors this past year. Yeah, and our visitors, they reflect the age diversity of our county, the income diversity of our county, and are very close on the ethnic diversity of our county. By the way, for those of you who worry about balance sheets, we also have $5 million more in assets than we used to have. We changed our museum not by changing the building, not by renting some fancy traveling exhibit. I'm sure you have an equivalent in your world of what that can look like. We changed our museum by changing its purpose and its connection to our community. And yes, I'm proud of these numbers. Certainly, I love making payroll. I love engaging my whole community. But these numbers and this growth also brought up a basic question for us. Who are all these people who now come to the museum every week and who did not know it existed beforehand? Why are they coming? Are they coming for the social experience? Are they coming because we're bringing history and art out into our community with new partners in new ways? Are they coming because we're changing the content on the walls? It was this set of questions that led me to ask a more basic question. What is relevance? And how can it relate to the success and the growth and the change we've seen? So the first thing I did when I started thinking about this question was I went looking for a definition. And I have something disappointing to share with you, which is this. Nothing is relevant to everyone. Not Beyonce, not Donald Trump, and certainly not museums or public media, right? I think we often get in this logical fallacy where we conflate importance with relevance. We say, oh, Shakespeare is relevant to everyone because it illuminates the human condition, or climate change is relevant to everyone because we all live on this earth, or that water in our cups is relevant to everyone because we all need ways to survive. Yeah, Shakespeare is important, water is important, but that doesn't make it relevant. We choose, every one of us, every day, what we're going to attend to, and what we're going to ignore. No institution can assign relevance by fiat. How do we make these choices? It turns out there are researchers who study what we decide is relevant. Probably Nat knows some of these researchers. And they say that how we decide what's relevant comes down to two questions we ask ourselves. How much meaning am I going to get out of this experience? And how much effort will it take? How much meaning would I get out of going to see that exhibit? How much effort would it take for me to find out when they're open, find somebody who wants to go, get a parking space, get a ticket, and go in? How much meaning would I get out of volunteering in my community? How much effort would it take for me to find an opportunity that really works for me? How much meaning would I get out of going into this bar? How much effort might it take to get over any trepidation I might have about it? We ask these questions every day, and we use them to decide what media we're going to consume, what things we're going to buy and support and spend our attention on. We make these choices about relevance to make the choices about the behaviors we will engage. And so I started thinking about this metaphor of relevance as the idea of a locked door. We knew at our museum that we had amazing stuff on the inside, that if you came in, you could have great art, you could have great history, you could have great community connections. And we had a lot of insiders telling us, yeah, we're getting all that great stuff. But we knew that there were too many people walking by the front of the museum not even knowing it existed. And to them, they didn't know there was great stuff on the other side of the door. They just had a question mark. And they had to ask themselves, is it worth it for me to slow down and figure out if there's meaning for me in there? Is it worth it for me to try that new piece of media or that new experience? Or should I keep walking with the keys that I already have in my pocket to the things I already know are relevant to me? At the mall, we realized there were too many people walking by our door, and we wanted to change that. And so I've come to feel that a definition of relevance is this, that relevance is a key that unlocks meaning. Every single person in this room is creating content and educational experiences with value and rich meaning. But unless people want to come in for it, unless people take out that key and open the door, they don't know that. When we start talking about doors and keys, we immediately start talking about who are our insiders and who are our outsiders. And unfortunately, I think we spend a little too much time in the frame of our insiders and not enough thinking about what it feels like to be outside that door. I think we have this fantasy that the way we're going to grow new audiences is to take what we already have and just open our existing doors wider. In my experience, growth and change in audience does not look like this. In my experience, we started with the people we had, the programs we had, and we grew like this. Now let me tell you, there is a safe side to this story, and it is this. Most of the Purple Circle people stayed. Most of our most traditional supporters, art lovers, history buffs, love seeing young people in the museum, love seeing the museum solvent. Fewer of them left than you might think. But here's the scary part of this picture. To achieve this kind of growth, we had to recenter our programs entirely outside of what had been familiar and comfortable to that Purple Circle initially. We had to take perfectly nice walls, metaphorically, in the room of what we were doing and say, hey, let's tear those down and build new doors for new people in new ways. Let me show you an example of what that kind of construction looked like. This is a poster from the first ever pop-up museum we did. A pop-up museum is a museum anybody can make. You create a theme, people bring their own objects on that theme, handwrite labels, boom, you got a museum. This one was the night before Valentine's Day. The theme was F My Ex. The idea was you brought an object from a failed relationship. We did it at a bar. I think you can probably imagine how this flyer in a university town in California was a key to a door that many people did not know existed. That we could walk down the street and hand this to people and they'd say, this looks cool. I didn't know we had a museum. I'm going to come. I think you can also imagine, though, some of the Purple Circle people who saw this flyer and were distressed. And I have learned if there are any marketing people in this room, I do not recommend putting the letter F alone on a flyer in this country. But more seriously, some of those insiders said, you know, the irreverence of this, the ephemerality of it, it runs counter to what I think a museum is all about. What they were saying was, why did you tear down that perfectly nice wall and put a bright neon pink door there instead? And of course, we did it to invite in those outsiders, for whom this created a point of relevance that our traditional programming would not. And actually, there was so much quote-unquote controversy about this flyer and this program that we wrote a blog post about it, and we got this really interesting comment in from this guy who said this. He said, "I'm closer to the stodgy traditional museum supporter than to the audiences you're currently trying to reach, but I strongly support your attempts and outreach to involve new communities. It's precisely because of that outreach that I finally became a museum member last year. There was no reason to do so because, in his opinion, the museum was doing nothing. I still have little occasion to go to the museum, but I'm willing to support it as an important community resource." This guy's so interesting, right? Here he is saying, I'm a Purple Circle person, but I didn't care about that museum. In fact, I saw it as doing nothing. And now I'm engaged, now I give you money because I see that you are doing something to involve more people in our community, even if it may not be exactly what I like. Yeah, but of course this is like the dream guy, right? We also get the comments like this. People who are pissed off. We get comments from people who are confused. This woman, this was at a board retreat. We were talking about our new focus on empowering communities. She said, I don't get it. I love museums. I go to learn. I go to have fun, but I don't go to be empowered. And I had to say to her, okay, but you're the mayor of Santa Cruz. I mean, I think you have a lot of opportunities to be empowered. When you open new doors to new people, it will distress and confuse some of the people who love what you have done for so long. But if you care about those new audiences, you have to do it. Because it should be just as important, if not more important, for you to create a welcoming space for them. And at the same time, you can work with people who are on the inside to be generous, to be more confident about welcoming them in as well. We do this work for people like Jasmine. Jasmine's a young woman. This is from a fundraising email we sent out. And she said, growing up in LA, I was surrounded by my, she means Latina, culture. There were constant reminders of who I am. Santa Cruz always felt like something was missing, that parts of me were missing, even after living here for 7 years. She says, the MA is special because it fills that gap. It reflects my story, my history, and my culture. We like to say at the MA that we are a museum of and, that we're building a bigger room for everyone, that we don't want to choose between purple circle and yellow circle. We want to keep opening it up. But sometimes we have to choose. And when I have to choose welcoming a young woman who is, for the first time, is feeling comfort and a sense of belonging in our town, and grappling with the confusion and uncertainty of somebody with a lot of empowerment, I'm always going to choose to welcome Jasmine and to invite that trustee into being part of welcoming her as well. Where do you find the Jasmines of the world? Oh, it's real simple. You go outside, you leave your membership, and you go talk to people who are on the outside of what you do. Because fundamentally, relevance is not about selling something to somebody. It's about empathy. It's about really understanding how it feels to be outside that locked door, in their shoes, weighing the decision of whether to come in. Remember this bar? My guess is that some of you don't have to identify yourself on Slido, look at this bar, and you want to go in. It looks fun. It looks intriguing. You're there. My guess is there are other people in this room, people like me, who look at this bar and think, I am walking by. It looks dirty. It looks imposing. You're going to skip it. We all see invisible welcome and keep out signs everywhere in our world. And we use those to decide, is this relevant to me? Should I take the risk and try and open that door? At our museum, we're constantly looking for ways to understand what might say welcome and what might say keep out to people who are not like us. And so we work with hundreds of partners every year. This is one group of them called C3, the Creative Community Committee. I look at this picture and I see farmers, I see bike messengers, I see technologists, I see many different people who can say, hey, for my community, here's what welcome looks like, here's what keep out looks like, so let's build a new door like this over here. We've actually adopted a new kind of programming model we call community-first programming, where we say, instead of creating a program and figuring out who to sell it to, we say, who's our community we want to focus on, what are the assets and needs of that community, and how can we build projects rooted in the assets and needs of that community. And I want to finish by sharing an example of what this looks like in a very deep project that we did last year. Last year, we co-created an exhibition called Lost Childhoods, Voices of Santa Cruz County Foster Youth. We did it in partnership with an entity called the Foster Youth Museum. We wanted to tell the story of transition-age foster youth, 18 to 25-year-olds, many of whom are homeless, many of whom are drug addicted, many of whom are parents, many of whom are struggling. And we wanted to do so in a way that was not sensationalizing or exploitative, but was of, by, and for this community. And so we worked with dozens of partners in our community. Our approach to partnership, we say nepotism first, call the people you know, but then always ask them who else should I be calling, and keep building a bigger room. So that by the time we had the first community meeting for this project, we had 100 people in the room, over half of whom were youth. This is the only community project I've ever been part of where every successive community meeting, more people showed up because they would bring their friends and say, hey, this is legit, come on down. Together with this group, we co-created the main ideas for this exhibition. We worked to partner youth with commissioned artists to co-create artworks for the exhibition. Youth helped install the exhibition. And in the end, we had this exhibition that was up for 6 months, our longest exhibition ever, telling the stories through objects, voices, images of these youth. We thought this was going to be a downer, and we thought nobody would come. It was our most highly attended exhibition ever at the museum. It included real hard stories and painful objects. This woman is standing in front of the case that says, there's a paper bag that says choose two. It's filled with like hotel-style toiletries. A lot of foster youth in group homes only have minimal access to things like shampoo or toothpaste. And then they have health challenges that they're not able to afford to take care of. There were a million of these stories in the exhibition of real youth and real objects from their experience. We also videoed and invited youth to share their own stories directly with visitors. We paid youth to serve as docents and to lead all the programs as part of the exhibition. And probably the most powerful and surprising part of the exhibition was we created this take action wall with these business cards with small things that anybody could do to help transition age foster youth. We knew that becoming a foster parent was a real heavy lift. We didn't want to ask people to do that. That actually was on one of these cards, but a lot of the cards said things like, hey, bake a birthday cake for a youth who doesn't have parents who are taking care of them, or help somebody find a job, or help somebody find housing. We had no idea what would happen with these cards. On the back of every one of them was a contact of an agency where you could go and broker this happening. Hundreds of people took these cards, 400 birthday cakes were made, youth found jobs, youth found housing, and actually in our county, they had more adults signed up to learn about becoming a CASA or a foster parent than in any other period in the previous 10 years. This project changed the way our community engaged with an essential issue. It created a new funding model for us because we had county partners suddenly who saw us as crucial to their public awareness, and I'm sorry to say to y'all, they were saying, gosh, we could put that money in a PSA, or we could do something deeply community engaged in a way that could have, from their perspective, broader impact. We learned so much from this project, and we learned more than anything from the youth involved. This is Jess Prudent, one of the youth who was involved in the project. And you're not supposed to have favorites when you do community projects, but Jess is one of my favorite partners I've ever worked with. We invited Jess to give the opening address at the donors and members preview for this exhibition the night before it opened. So this is the night where it's all the museum members, it's our politicians, you know, it's all the important people in the room, right? And she gets up on the stage first. And I want to share with you what she said. Jess said this: if you've already met me, you likely know that I am friendly, loyal, hardworking, and fiercely protective of my community. Keeping this in mind, I hope y'all will understand what I mean when I say that my original intention when joining this group of over 100 foster youth, artists, and advocates that contributed to this project was not to make art. I originally joined because I had seen many cases of organizations attempt to represent and support foster youth, LGBT youth, youth of color, youth with disabilities, homeless youth, and again I saw youth being sidelined, being spoken over, being patronized and tokenized and left out from the very projects meant for them. As a proud and protective person, I was ready to stop that shit before it even started. To put it simply, I joined this exhibition expecting the maw to fuck up and that I would need to call them on it. And let me just remind you that I'm standing like right over here off stage while she's saying all this. I am happy and relieved to say I never felt the need to. From day one, foster youth were brought to the forefront of every idea, every art piece, a setup of the exhibit, everything. As if to rub in my face how wrong my original assumption was, the MA has included art pieces from foster youth in this exhibit, and it is curated by foster youth and interns. To again put it simply, Lost Childhoods is an exhibit by, of, from, and for foster youth. Y'all are just lucky enough to enjoy it. To me, doing this work, yeah, you can applaud for Jess, absolutely. You know, I text her every time I share this, and I say, oh, you know, more people got to hear your words. For me, this work is not just about growing audience or being relevant to new people. It's being meaningful to new people. It's expanding the impact of what we do inside that room. And I've learned from Jess and so many community partners how we can go deeper with that. And that's why, and I'll be playing around with folks in the masterclass around these ideas, and specifically around this idea that when we are of and by our community, that is when we become for our community. That when we are representative of the people in our community who we want to involve, when we invite them to create so that the programs are created by them, then we become welcoming for our community. It's not about our marketing, it's not about the programs we present, it's about how we involve people in their co-creation. And so we've been taking this formula and saying, hey, let's go bigger with this. And just last May, we opened this online global network called Of By For All, inviting organizations of all kinds that serve the public around the world to be part of this movement, to make our institutions of, by, and for our communities. We're starting with this online self-assessment. About 1,500 people around the world have taken it. People have taken it in every state in the US. If you get bored during our Q&A, you can try it yourself on your phone. It's free. You get a confidential report at the end about where you're at. We started this just as a tool to get a taste of where are we at right now. And then we're building this thing called the Change Network, organizations that are saying we're ready to commit to new communities in our work. We're starting with 21 organizations around the world. We have one public media organization in this first 21, Marfa Public Radio down in Texas. And we're looking forward to involving hundreds and thousands of organizations in this movement in the future. And so I'm here today to invite you to join this movement, to become of, by, and for our communities, and to think about the metaphorical rooms in which we work, and how we cannot be satisfied with the people we have just on the inside. Not be satisfied to use cheap tricks in marketing to bring new audiences in for one program and then they go away. But instead to think about how we can honestly, courageously, with our community partners, find those walls that we can turn into construction sites to open new doors to new people together. Thank you. My friend Nat's going to come to the stage now, and we're going to take your questions. That's all we were told, so we don't know anything else. If you have a question you'd like to ask, that would be great. Or if somebody's moderating the Slido experience, we're happy to take one of those questions too.
Why don't you turn to the first one?
Okay, great. What's the relationship between framing and relevance? Do you want to speak to that, Matt?
I want to know what you think.
You know, I really debated when I was first working on the research for the book. I really debated. I came into it very suspicious about what relevance means, and I thought, oh, this seems surface, this seems gloss. And then when I started to think about it as in this door, as opposed to thinking about it as the meaning, it really changed things for me. And I guess what I heard and what you said was similar in terms of saying that it doesn't change the content. We're talking about kids being successful. We're talking about what addiction does to communities, but it changes how we enter that conversation. And so I guess that it seems to me like you're thinking in a sophisticated way about how we frame that first invitation into the room, and I'm often thinking about what do those doors look like, who's greeting at them, and what does that experience look like?
Yeah, so your talk was absolutely amazing, by the way.
Thanks.
I mean, it was awesome. I'm glad I went first. I think there's an incredible amount of crossover between what you said and what I said before. I mean, I think that what you've shown yourself to be is a master framer, right? You've been able to frame this institution in a way that changes how the community sees it and itself. I mean, I think in essence, a lot of what you're talking about is framing.
Sure.
It's not, and the frame is not the content. It's not the message. It's the way that you invite people into the content, the way that you allow people to come into the message.
There's a question about how do we best communicate public media television is relevant to people who don't own a TV. I am one of those people. I also have a 5-year-old. I admit we never watch public media. We watch the lava in the volcano in Hawaii in clips on YouTube occasionally, and that's about the extent of our media consumption. Do you have a TV, Nat?
I do. I have one TV and 3 children, and they do watch public media.
Yeah.
Probably more than I would like.
I guess.
TV, not the public media.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder about, to this framing side, you have a product that right now is within a physical frame of it being delivered on a particular platform. And I wonder what's the meaning, though, inside that room. My guess is the reason your insiders love what you do is not because it's delivered via TV, but because of something about the seriousness and richness of the content, the depth, the way it's presented. And I think that if you can focus on the core value being about what makes your content and the experience with you unique, then it'll be much more platform versatile, and there'll be less of a sense, as I do, of, I don't have a TV, it must not be relevant to me. That's a frame that's not helping you. I wonder if there's a different frame about how that media could be connected to somebody like my life. How do you balance the risk to your bottom line when you go outside your existing circle? What a good question. This is a good situation for the crisis is a terrible thing to waste situation. We kept saying in the beginning, well, what's the worst that could happen? We could close. We were almost there. For us, our original circle was not one that was servicing us sufficiently to survive, even let alone thrive. I always say that I think actually the organizations that have the biggest challenge around this are ones where it's sort of like everything's okay. You can see that you're going towards the cliff. You can see it's a few years out, maybe demographic shift, maybe membership slide, but there's not enough reason to make a hard turn yet. And I guess what I would suggest to you is that you really think about where do you see your community being in 5 to 10 years, and how is your organization moving on a path to meet them somewhere along the way. You know what Wayne Gretzky said, right? My quotes are so much less profound than yours. He skates to where the puck is going. You don't have to be in step with people, but if you're going in a different direction than them, that's not going to set you up for a great situation in the future. So I'll also say, for us, we raised a ton of new money from people who were not focused on art or history or learning, but were focused on building a stronger community. And I don't know what you're hearing in the news, but I hear a lot of agitas around that, and a lot of opportunity for us to take some responsibility and some of that value and that share of that opportunity with regard to funding and programming.
So there's 2 questions, one of which is not up on the screen anymore, but they're related. So the question that I'm seeing right now is how do we frame the idea that not everyone is destined for a 4-year degree, but a trade credential or associate degree could be just as valuable. There was another question that was just on here about how can we assure that our framing is effective? Right, and so one of the points that I made is that you can know before you go. That requires that you either do research or have access to research, and I would advise that you can do a little bit of both. There is great work that has been done by my organization and other organizations that fairly directly answers that first question. Work that we've done on framing higher education. There is a way to frame that argument. A lot of the organizations that are doing this work are, like we are, nonprofits whose mission is to support people like you, and that means that every single piece of research that we have ever done is free and publicly available for you all to access and learn from. So if you do not have large, expansive budgets to conduct original framing research, there are folks who do and have, and you should avail yourself of those materials. You can.
There's a question here, how do we get stakeholders to understand the importance of the yellow circle? Yeah, this is something we focused on a lot, and I've worked with a lot of other organizations. I was just with historical trust people in Austin. I'm spending time with Canadian orchestra people too soon, and it's all the same question. And I think that there are 2 pieces to it. One is to really make for yourself those yellow circle people real. So go meet them, go talk to them. And I actually used to have a rule in the very beginning with the board. Anytime they brought up, well, my friend in, insert rich suburb here, wants X, I say, every time we talk about somebody who's inside, I want you to also bring up somebody who has a concern who we don't talk to. A person from a neighborhood that we've expressed we would really like those people to be here, but we actually don't even know who they are. So we like to say, get the voices in your head, get the voices in your room. There are a lot of different ways to do that. It usually involves going outside and talking to people. But then the other thing that often comes up around this is the tension, right? The fear among insiders that they will be displaced for somebody younger, browner, different from them. And I think that one of the things that we've done, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, is to try very actively to invite insiders into that conversation about involving outsiders. I remember once talking to somebody who said, she ran a historic house in New Mexico, and she had a board member who said to her, I love that this feels like my private club. And she said to that board member, it's so lovely you feel that way. Don't you want to share that with others? And I would so frequently, in the first couple years of our change, when we were fighting about it, I'd be standing in front of a gala about this big, half the room was pissed off at me, half the room was excited, but I would say to everybody, I feel so lucky to work in a community with people, supporters like you, who are generous and courageous, who are generous about sharing what this museum is about with new people, and who are courageous about trying new ways to do so. And let me tell you, at least half the people in the room did not feel generous and did not feel courageous, but I was giving them a positive self-value concept that they could be part of. I was giving them a frame that was not your outside and somebody else is now in, but to say, hey, help welcome these new people in. Come on down to a teen night and see what it's all about and feel proud that you've helped make this happen. Now, I will say that while that works for a lot of insiders, sure, there are people who will walk away. And to that, I learned something from a woman named Cookie Ruiz who runs Ballet Austin. She said, bless and release. That there are some people who it's like you're in an existential war about their dissatisfaction with how you are changing. And if you can give them the gift of saying, gosh, you've done so much for this organization as a volunteer, in my world, a docent, my God. And I know that you could give, you're not happy right now, and there's so much you could give to another organization. I hope you find another organization that values your incredible skills. I know they'll be lucky to have you. It's kind of a gift for both people. And then you stop losing nights of sleep and losing great staff who are trying to make that change but are getting hammered by that discontent along the way.
So I just want to follow up before we get to the next one about
Yeah.
the idea of the yellow circle.
Yeah.
That was the purple circle, yellow circle thing was probably my favorite of your slides. And so the way that we talk about framing is a particular lens on that science and that practice. There are people that do framing that is really kind of more about persuasion, right? Persuading people to support a particular position or think a particular way. The way that we try to do framing is very much about continuously framing issues such that you grow that circle. It's about building and broadening constituencies. It's about taking people who are not part of the conversation for a variety of reasons and using framing to kind of engage and bring them in to the conversation. So I think that that's another nice kind of overlap between the work that you talked about and the work that I talked about in terms of framing.
Well, and I know that, I have known about your work for a while, and really, especially when things were hot in our big change years, was really thinking about framing, and particularly about arming our supporters to feel proud and to be able to share. I mean, one of the frames we often used was we would say, hey, the museum's like a restaurant with a really big menu. There should be something on the menu you like to eat, but you don't boycott a restaurant because there are some things on the menu that aren't for you. Because I don't know about y'all, but I imagine it may be similar. There are some insiders who say, I walked into the museum and there was something I didn't like. I turned on the TV and there was something that wasn't for me. And it's like, great. How can we reframe that to feel great about the fact that we're for a diversity of things, as opposed to saying, oh, we have to only be for this narrow audience 100% of the time or in 100% of our programs. So I found, but for me, it's come from a background around slam poetry and trying to look for metaphor in different ways.
So there's a question about defining framing. So I'll do that quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
And the easiest way would be to say, like, it's what she's been doing for the last half an hour up on this stage. So when you go to an audience and you tell them, you make decisions about what you're saying this issue is about, that's framing. So framing is the choices that we make and how we present information. And there's a whole bunch of choices, both big and small. It could be the pronouns that we use. Do we say us and them, or do we talk about we? Right? It could be the more obvious things that you've probably noticed in what Nita's talking about, which I would call values, right? Talking about courage rather than the myriad other choices that you could have made about that value. It's about messenger, right? Who's delivering the message is an important decision in terms of the framing. It's about metaphor. It's about the way that you choose metaphors to help kind of provide a through line and help people better understand what an issue is about and how it works.
And I'll just say as a practitioner, I'm sure Nat has a formula for this or a structure for this. It's not always obvious to me what frame I'm going to use. Even in the book, the whole thing about doors, I actually had like 4 different versions of metaphors in the first draft, and people were like, oh, you can't do this ocean depth thing and this door thing and this heart thing. And it's like, okay, you pick the frame that is working best. And so I think there's also, it's not like spontaneously these things come out of nowhere. You try lots of different ones out, and you see which one is really landing. There's never just one frame in my experience.
And I think that's a really important point. So I think there's the risk when I get up and show bar graphs and all that fancy researchy stuff, that you walk away thinking that that's what research is. That's what research is, but research is also what Nina just said. It's about being open to the idea that there are multiple ways that you could do something, trying them, being very attentive and systematic with how they land, and then kind of changing and reiterating the way that you're making those choices.
Well, you were telling stories about A to B tests.
Yeah.
I mean, do you do A to B to C to D, like with something like child development or effective parenting, are you trying out like 5 or 6, and then it's like, here's the one that's best? How does that work?
Yeah, so it starts from a lot of qualitative research. It starts from a lot of talking to people. Mm-hmm. All kinds of people who are involved, not affected, not affected by an issue, and kind of seeing what the available frames are. Mm-hmm. And then, kind of, to put it in one way, kind of taking all those and throwing them up against the wall, empirically, that's a metaphor, and seeing what sticks. So in that parenting example from Australia, I think we tested a total probably of about 12 values. 4 of those what are called issue frames, kind of the big thing that you tell people it's about. I think we've tested 25 different metaphors to communicate particular aspects of parenting, and kind of the idea that parenting is a skill, not an innate, natural characteristic that either you have or don't have. And so there's a lot of testing of a lot of stuff that goes on that I didn't show you in that relatively simplified graph. Absolutely.
We're in our last minute. Maybe instead of taking a last question, Nat, do you have a last comment you want to make? They just let us stand up here with these mics, so I'm just going with it.
Yeah, you go first.
I appreciate sincerely your enthusiasm for what we're saying, and I just urge you, as Pat was saying in the beginning, to look at this not just as an opportunity for learning, but also for action. Another one of the quotes that I love is that one of the reasons people don't recognize opportunity is it often goes around wearing overalls and looking like hard work. I don't think that this is easy, but that doesn't mean it isn't important, and it doesn't mean it can't be awesome for the future of your organization and your community. So I just really hope that you'll join us and each other in continuing to push hard to do this work.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the kind of the difficulty of what we're talking about is important to acknowledge. It's not that you're going to walk out of here or out of our master classes being able to go back to your desk in an afternoon, kind of like figure this all out. But I think it's about awareness to me. It's about, in terms of the work that I do, hopefully you all are aware now that the choices that you make and how you communicate are significant. They're not inconsequential. The difference between using the value of courage and using the value of inclusion, which is another choice you could have made, I'm going to argue that there's probably a significant difference in terms of how that audience would have reacted to those choices. So my takeaway is just hopefully an awareness of the importance of these things that I don't think we typically put enough time, attention, and afford enough importance to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Well, again, we really want to thank Nat and Nina for being with us today. And honestly, you could spend like a whole day with them, right? And we're glad that we're able to provide some opportunity to break out into meeting rooms for master classes. Nat will be in meeting room GH. Nina will be in meeting room IJ. And for anyone so interested in doing a pop-up museum on F, my ex, that'll be in meeting room F. I'm just kidding. But please, there's a 15-minute break and find your ways to the meeting room of your choice. Thank you for this morning.
Homelessness is an issue in this community because even on the Homelessness is an issue in this community because even on the daily walking to school, we see people living on the street. Homelessness is an issue in this community